Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Metaphysical Bible Hangout. I am Reverend Sherri James, Senior Minister for Understanding Principles Church in Los Angeles, California. We are a Bible-based New Thought Christian church, and it is our delight to have you be a part of our service. So if you're ever in the Los Angeles area, please visit us. We're located at 600 West Queen Street in Inglewood, California. So right now, where we are, we're in the midst of a lesson on Leviticus. So we're doing a walk through the scriptures with this text, the Reverend Dr. Mary Tumpkins text, A Student's Guide to the Hebrew Scriptures. A Student's Guide to the Hebrew Scriptures. And this is a really powerful text. And what it is that it really gives you an understanding of just what is actually in the Bible. Like, before we can apply metaphysics, we actually just need to know, what does the text say? Like, what's actually in the Bible? And so this is a walk through the scriptures, and we're taking our time, but I want you to have this, because when we go to metaphysical interpretation, you'll understand where some of these definitions come from. Largely what's happening with metaphysics is this attempt to try to get back to what the original writers intended. There's no way to know that with clarity, because we are several millennia removed from that time in history, but it is as close an approximation as possible. And so metaphysics is always looking at definitions. It's always considering what was the original meaning of the word, what was the original meaning of the text. It tries to get at that before it gets at doctrine, before it gets at, okay, well, now how do we interpret this? And so that's why this study is important. And I think you need to know about your Bible. Going through this course with Reverend Mary really taught me to love the Bible. I didn't even know I loved the Bible. I was like, I don't think I had a feeling one way or the other. And then going through that text with Reverend Mary just really opened something up for me. And so it was just a powerful experience, and I want to share that with you. So right now we're gonna pray ourselves in, and then we're gonna get into the conversation side on Leviticus. So just right where you are, I'm gonna give you a prayer formula. It's what I taught last week when I wasn't with you guys I was with the Unity of Sacramento Prayer Chaplains. It's an 8-step prayer. I'll give you the steps right now. So it's to take a breath, just breathe. Breathing just connects you to the divine. Then it's to move from your head to your heart. So it's literally taking your attention from the head to the heart. Sometimes if you need to, you can place your hand over your heart to keep your attention in the heart space. And then it's to call on the name of God according to whatever name you have for God, whatever that is. And then once you do that, then it is about listening, just being open to what the Spirit wants to say, and you're just listening for that guidance, so that if you're praying with someone or you're praying for yourself, you're listening for what to say in the prayer. And then you begin to pray, whatever that is. If you're dealing with a backache, Father, Mother, God, I've got, my back is hurting, and I don't want this, and I don't want to be on medication, and I don't want to have a surgery, and I know, God, that you can do anything, so I'm trusting you to provide a solution that fits for me. And then, so that's the prayer. And then there is a release. And the release is really for us. We got to let go of the prayer. Just let it go. And then thanksgiving. Gratitude is the language of the universe. Gratitude changes what you see. We're swimming. We're like the fish in water when it comes to God. That God is everywhere evenly present, but we need the eyesight to be able to actually see that this is so. And so that gratitude changes what it is that we see. And then the closure. So amen, ashe, and so it is, in the combination of that, but it's basically bringing the prayer to a close. Okay. So what we're praying for tonight is just really a great class, and just for the Spirit of God to move in us and to reveal to us, God, to reveal himself to us in a deeper way. Okay. So take a deep breath. One more time, deep breath. And last time, letting all tension go, deep breath. And now go to your heart space and remain there. So travel that 18-inch journey from the head to the heart. And then call on God. Father, Mother, God, I just recognize you as greater than any situation that I'm facing right now. That your presence is more than anything that stands in front of me or in front of anyone present right now. And so we just recognize you as the supreme power and the ultimate source of all good. For the Bible Hangout tonight, God, we just ask for a great class. We ask for you to just come in through us, to us, and reveal yourself in a deeper way. Show us what you need us to know in this text called Leviticus. Help us to understand what's on the page. Soften our hearts so that we may receive what you have for us. And then shore us up so that we may go forward in strength and solidarity, knowing that there is only one power, there is only one presence. And wherever we are, not only is the power and presence of God there, but that we are God's emissary in that space. Thank you, God. I release this prayer. I trust you to answer it as you've answered every other prayer I've ever prayed. And for that, God, I give thanks. Just deep, deep, abiding gratitude. In the name and the nature of the one that we call the Christ, I affirm that this prayer is so, and so it is. And amen. All right, let's get to it. So this, I'm going to go back a little bit. So our last class meeting, I started with the on page 34, but I need to back up a little bit because I've got some stuff I want to give you on Leviticus. So I'm at the upper middle of page 35, and it is the underneath letter B, and it says Leviticus employs a distinctive way of looking at the world in relation to God. Everything in the world has a set place in divine order. This is really important to understanding the Hebrew, that ancient Hebrew mind, that everything has a set place in divine order, that God didn't randomly put anything anywhere. So plants are exactly where they're supposed to be. Animals that live in the ocean are exactly where they're supposed to be. Animals that fly in the sky are exactly where they're supposed to be, that everything has a place. In other words, what we say in New Thought is that God is highly intentional, that every creature that God created has a specific function. I've told you guys the story of the beetle before. There are 400,000 different types of beetles, and each one of them has a unique job. Each one of them has a unique job. None has the same job as the other, even though some of the jobs might look similar, but they each do different things. So everything in the world has a set place in divine order, and everything derives its meaning from its relationship with God. So everything is in relationship to God, and everything is in a place that God placed it somewhere. So this is a very well thought out theology as far as how the universe works. Now, go to letter A. I said it's Roman numeral 2 is what I should have said. But the terms that are critical to this worldview are holy and clean. That's what goes in that first blank. And their opposites, profane and unclean. Holy and clean, and profane and unclean. So what goes in that first blank, 14, you see in parentheses, holy and clean. And what goes in that second blank where it says 15 is profane and unclean. So let me tell you some stuff about this, because this is really just powerful. So Leviticus is a document of the priestly school. These are some notes that I put together to give you. So we identify this work as priestly, and this is why. It deals with matters that were of special concern to and under the jurisdiction of the priests. So things like the sanctuary. This is the stuff that's covered in Leviticus. The cultic ritual, like what were the things that you did in the temple? The system of sacrifices. We're going to talk about the 5 different types of sacrifice. And so there was a system for it. And so Leviticus is very concerned with, well, how are these sacrifices supposed to happen, or what sacrifices are supposed to be done? This distinction between the holy and the profane, the pure and the impure. And so these priestly materials, they are found as a block in Leviticus and a large part of Numbers. And then they're scattered throughout Genesis and Exodus. And because of these common themes, like just everything dealing with the life of the priesthood, we say that they were produced by a priestly school, meaning that they came out of a community that was concerned with how do you do God, basically. So the key word, these terms, we're going to come back to them. We're going to talk about them a lot tonight, but is holy and clean, profane and unclean. Holiness has to do with the qualitative difference and the total otherness of God. So because God is totally different from humankind, humans need to respect this difference and stand in awe of him. So a thing I want to tell you about holiness. Holiness is about separation in both its positive and negative aspects. It entails a separation of an object to that which sanctifies it, which is God. And it involves separation from in the form of safeguards against anything that would threaten to remove its sanctity. So remnants of that and what we practice are things like don't eat in the sanctuary. Back in the day, I don't know if this is so much today, because we have kind of moved away from it. But when I was growing up, women had dresses that couldn't come above a certain length, or else it was not considered holy. Men didn't wear hats in church. You would see men coming, they had the hat, they had the fedora or the fez or whatever the different types of hats that they might have been wearing. But as soon as they get to the church door, it's like, oh, let me take this hat off. So it was a very big deal about, where you wear a hat. Holy things are holy because they're removed from the realm of the common by means of rules or safeguards that set them apart as different and separate, and they determine that we use them differently. So the sanctuary is a holy place. We use it differently than we would use, say, another room in the church. I want to go back for a minute with this holy and clean. I've got some good stuff I want to share with you. So the Hebrew word that is holy actually has a root that means separate. So the root of the word that's translated as holy actually means separate. And that which is holy is separate. It's withdrawn from common everyday use, meaning it has special meaning. In a home, it would be like the china. The china has a special place. It sits in the cabinet. It's only brought out for holidays or special occasions. In the priestly view, only God is intrinsically holy. God can impart holiness to. He can sanctify persons and places and things when they're brought into a specific kind of relationship with him. And this is a relationship that's best described as a relationship of ownership. But what is holy is what is in God's realm. Hear that. What is holy is what is in God's realm. So it's something that's separated to God. And then that which is outside of God's realm is considered common. Now, the Hebrew word for common is sometimes translated by the English into the word profane. But that word profane, the way that we use it, has a negative connotation in English, but it doesn't have a negative connotation in the Hebrew. So the profane just simply means not holy, not sacred. We use it differently now, but the fact is that the common or profane state is the natural default state of most objects and things. So, this computer is profane. It's common, meaning that it's available for everyday use. It's not separated or marked off for special kind of treatment because, it's not holy. All right. So, for example, if we had a computer in a church and that computer was only used to send out prayers or to quote unquote do the work of God, meaning whatever you consider that is, however you define that, that if it had that kind of dedicated use, then that computer would be considered holy. But a computer that's, say, for everyday use is profane. So profane has to do with, has it been set aside for God, or is it available for everyday use? So it's not the way that we use, like when we say profane language, and we mean that you're cursing or you're speaking, in blue terms or whatever. So for a common object to become holy, because a common object, something that's profane, can become holy, you need a special act of dedication to God. And this is an act of sanctification. So when we talk about being sanctified, what we mean is that we are moving out of common everyday use, and that we are reserving ourselves or something for God. And so people, places, and things can be sanctified. And this is where you transfer a thing to God, or God's realm, or God's service. So, people come under that being transferred for God's service. We haven't gotten to this yet, but when we get to Samson was a Nazirite. And that means from birth, he was set aside by his parents to basically be of service to God. That was all part of like why his hair wasn't cut. And there's some other things that basically that made him sanctified, that made him holy and pure. And so him consorting with Delilah, and there were many other things he did way before then, was all part of him becoming impure and basically reducing his holiness, reducing his connection, his service to God. And the final straw that breaks the camel's back for Samson is that he basically cut his hair. And so he reduced his holiness, his service to God, down to zero. And so that he was no longer sanctified. He was no longer set apart for God's service. Let me know if there are any questions for this. Okay. The priestly rituals of Leviticus are intended to distance humans from their imperfect world so they could assume a measure of the holiness that belongs to God. So hear that again, what people, according to the Hebrew mind, people in their natural state are common, they're profane, they haven't necessarily been set aside for the service of God. So the rituals that are described in Leviticus are how you become available to God, how you become useful to God because you belong to God. And so this was a way for them to assume a measure of holiness and to get closer to God. No different than when we talk about meditation. How do we make ourselves available to God? We each have gifts and talents inside of us. How do we get those gifts and talents out of us into expression? In fact, the Metaphysical Bible Challenge that I'm doing right now is all about the manifestation of your gifts. It's all about how do I take what's inside of me that has no form, that has no substance other than my ideas about it. How do I take what is formless and turn it into formed expression? That's the whole thing. And so we meet together, we have daily accountability calls, we've got a special journal that we're working with, because all of it is how do I get myself in alignment with the presence and power of God so that I can get what's on the inside of me that is formless good. How can I get it out of me turned into formed good? Is this making sense? Let me know. Somebody say something. Let me know you're not dead. All right. Going to the next one. So in order for the Israelites to become holy, they must refrain from sin and stay away from uncleanness. Now, in the priestly worldview, sin was solely associated with uncleanness. Sin was solely associated with uncleanness. Got it. Good. It's making sense. Okay, great. So now this thing with sin, let's deal with this. So sin is not the way that we think about it today. Sin was really about whether or not something was pure or impure, or profane or an unclean, or holy and clean. So uncleanness didn't necessarily have to have a negative context. So, pulling my notes up. So there were two types of impurity. There was ritual impurity and there was moral impurity. Now, with ritual impurity, this arises from physical substances and states. So things that cause ritual impurity would be things like sexual contact or burying the dead. These are the things, usually one of those two things that makes someone ritually, give someone a ritual impurity. You can think of it like if somebody's contagious, where something is transferred by touch or sharing in closed space. Ritual impurity is impermanent. It can be removed. So ritual impurity is that it defiles or it renders impure what has been sanctified. So if let's say you are a priest and you've been sanctified to the service of God by burying the dead or by engaging in sex, this idea of not engaging in sex is a later thing, but engaging in sex, that those are things that render you impure or rendered you unclean. And so impurity is it's not really connected to like evil spirits. That's something later. Interestingly, human and animal excrement are not sources of ritual impurity, but corpses, skin diseases, things that are associated with like decomposition, really everything around death, and then genital discharges. It was this association with death and sexuality that renders one impure, because God's realm has no death and has no sex and no death. So if you go back to Genesis chapter 1, there's no sex and there's no death. So God, in God's world, in order to be in the realm of God, you have to be purified from sex and you have to be purified from death. Well, those are two things that are part of your everyday life. So it doesn't make you unavailable to the service of God. It just means that you've got a ritual impurity. And so you've got to go through a sacrificial process or procedure to basically render yourself clean. Now, there is a such thing as moral impurity, and this is about the commission of sin. So this is idolatry, homicide, and sexual transgression. So not sex like sanction, sex for procreation, but sex like orgies, the stuff that was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. This differs from ritual impurity because it's not contagious. Moral impurity is not reducible through acts. So ritual impurity you can reduce through certain procedures to basically re-sanctify yourself to God. You cannot do that with moral impurity. Moral impurity was handled really by punishment, and largely the punishment was death. And maybe if you had like an accidental death, they had sanctuary cities where if you were accused of or guilty of an accidental death, you could be in this sanctuary city. But largely, rampant sexual transgressions, that it's the idea that it defiles God. It defiles the land that God has put you in. And so the only way to get rid of it is basically death. And so this is part of what's going on with Sodom and Gomorrah. There is one purification ceremony that's given for moral impurity, but in general, when you commit something or do something that causes moral impurity, it's pretty much not reducible. You kind of, damned. But as far as the ancient concept is concerned. So Leviticus, I'm going over to page 36. Leviticus categorizes the world into clean and unclean things and describes procedures that can move one from a state of uncleanness to cleanness. So that everything in Leviticus, remember what I said, it's the ancient think and grow rich. How do I move from how I'm thinking in my, common way and move to thinking in alignment with God? How do I move from uncleanness to cleanness, right? And this procedure is this process of sanctification. Give me a second, I see your question. Ray says, now these were priestly laws. Yeah. Well, these were laws regarding the priesthood, and because they belong to a distinct voice or community in our Bible, we say it comes out of the priestly school. But we don't really 100% know what that means. But it was termed that because every time you see this writer show up, meaning using the name for God that they use, different things that reveal the source, they're always concerned with what are the priests doing. They're always concerned with the holy laws, what keeps something clean, what makes something unclean, what makes something pure, what makes something impure. So I don't want you to think that like there was like a group of priests. This is saying that every time this writer shows up in the text, they're always concerned about the things that concern the priesthood. The normal or natural state of objects and persons is to be clean, and a clean thing can be elevated to the status of holiness. Okay, Ray says, however, these laws were used to govern or control the masses. Yes, but I don't want you to think that they were used with nefarious intent. They were in the wilderness. They had to adopt a way of being that would allow them to go in and inhabit the promised land. So let me give you kind of a modern day example. We're in the process now at church of, securing our own building. In order to do that, there's a way that we've got to behave. There are things that we don't even have to think about right now, simply because we don't have a building to manage and to maintain. And so there are some things that we're able to take for granted right now because we don't have those responsibilities. But in order to get ready for our own building, there are things that we have to do to get ready to inhabit a new land. So Leviticus and Numbers is about this Israelite community getting ready to inhabit a new land. Part of being in leadership is looking at how the community looks right now and saying, we would not be ready for a building. That, people walk by, if there's paper on the floor, they just leave it on the floor. You don't get a building and pick the paper up off the floor. You pick the paper up off the floor and then you get the bill. It's like you got to establish a consciousness before you go in. So Leviticus is about establishing consciousness. So I want you to think of it in that light. So when we talk about moving to a state of holiness, it's how do we get everybody on one accord so that we can be ready for what God has for us? That's part of what we're doing at church. We've got financial peace going right now. We got another class starting in the fall. We're doing a whole year on the year of yes. We've got the Dream series coming in September, where we're going to be teaching people how to manifest their dreams. We did a slew of training. We had Reverend Darrell come in at the top of the year and train us. We had Reverend Edwin come in and do some training. We went down to Saddleback. Reverend Sherri and I went and met with and to learn from Tony Robbins. It's like we got all this stuff that we're doing because we're establishing consciousness. If you could think of Leviticus, because I don't want you to see these people as separate and apart and certainly not ignorant, that what they were doing was establishing consciousness so that they could go in and possess the land. And so there is all this internal work and external work to get their habits in order. You whatever it is that you want God to give you, you got to prepare for it. Whatever it is you want God to give you, you got to prepare for it. So we ask God for money, we make no provisions for it. No one has $1 million sitting in a single account. So even just learning how is $1 million held, is a portion of it in real estate, is a portion of it in the account. How is that held? So even just developing the consciousness to have that. And that's developed over time. That's setting up the accounts, creating investments. And it's how do I have $1 million or greater? Okay, great. So the normal or natural state of objects and persons is to be clean, and a clean thing can be elevated to the status of holiness through the process of sanctification, which, and sanctifies just means you're literally made holy, meaning that you have been set apart for work for God. So the work I did in seminary was part of a sanctification process. The prayer chaplain training that I just took the prayer chaplains through in Sacramento is a sanctification process. Going through the teacher training program is a sanctification process. It's taking a thing that is clean and elevating it to the status of holiness. And so there is a procedure to do that. The notions of clean and unclean are related to the way the priestly group understood the created world, and was the expression of a comprehensive worldview in which everything had its proper place. Everything for this group is all about proper place, proper place. So holiness and purity, they're not identical. We think of holiness as purity, but they really don't have the connotations that we have today. Those are later creation. So holiness and purity are not identical. Holy does not mean pure, and common does not mean impure. Holy does not mean pure, and profane or common does not mean impure. To be holy means to belong to or to be in the realm of God. So whenever you think of holy, as far as the Bible is concerned, it is not about the way that we've been taught it growing up. Holy with this ancient community is about being set aside for God's use. Holy is about being set aside for God's use. Now, things can't become holy and can't come into contact with the holy or the sacred if they are not first pure. So you do have to be pure to be holy. And again, purity is about clean and unclean. Hear that. Purity is about clean and unclean. Things that are clean are available for God's service, and there's a process by which you go through to basically be purified. But unclean happens in only a few ways. It is one that you have engaged in some type of sexual act. Doesn't mean a bad sexual act. This could be sex between a couple, that is married. Or you have been involved with, say, or touched in some way the dead, whether it is a dead animal, whether it is a dead person, or anything like that. Those things render you impure, and there are processes that are outlined in Leviticus for how your purity is reestablished. Only moral impurity is irreversible in many instances, and that has to do with murder, idolatry, and rampant sexual transgressions, meaning that rapes, things like that. Stuff that's much more along the lines of hurting someone through sex. So purity, which is the absence of impurity, is a prerequisite for access to the holy or for holy status. But just because you're pure doesn't mean that you're holy. It just means that you are qualified to be sacred. To be pure is to be qualified to be sacred, meaning that again, if you've engaged in the sexual act, if you have somehow touched the dead or something like that, and you have incurred a ritual impurity, there's a procedure that you go through to basically be made clean again. To be in a state of impurity just means that you're not qualified to contact the sacred. To be in a state of impurity just means you're not qualified, meaning that you can't go do nothing in the church or do anything with the priesthood. And remember, the priesthood is and the priestly rituals are the center of the community. So it's a big deal. Excuse me. It's a big deal to not be pure, because the priesthood this is the center of life. Excuse me. Came out of nowhere. So, for example, if you're impure at home and you're just minding your own business, it's no big deal. It's only a problem if you decide that you want to go to the sanctuary. So purity and impurity, thanks, Ray. My eyes are tearing. So purity and impurity are states of qualification or disqualification for contact with the things that are holy. Excuse me. Woo. So things are either holy or common. Remember, common is the Hebrew word. It's been translated in the English as profane. But if they're holy, they have to be pure. On the other hand, common things or profane things can be pure or impure. Profane or common just means it's not set aside for the use of God. It just means that it is available for everyday use. But holy and impure can never come together. If an impure object comes in contact with a holy object, then the holy object is immediately defiled. It is immediately rendered impure, and it automatically loses its holy status and becomes both impure and profane. And so to be restored, you've got to do two things. First, you got to purify it. And then second, you got to sanctify it. Once you made it pure, then it's still common, but meaning profane, but now it has to be made holy again. And so that's like a rededication or a re-sanctification, but it's a two-step process. Just because you are pure does not mean you are holy. You can be pure and common, or the English word, the way that it's been translated, is profane, and you can be impure and common. But if you want to be holy, you got to be pure first. So it's a two-step process. Think of it the way that we do, our meditations. The beginning meditation, if you read any Catherine Potter, really anybody's book, the first thing you got to do is you got to relax the body. So this is that making yourself pure. That you got to get into a calm, relaxed state. And then you make the contact. But if you don't ever get calm, you never make the contact. So, and I keep drawing these parallels. Alita says, I can see how church people get this confused. Yes, it's really been turned around. That's about it. It has been turned around and upside down. All right. So the process of putting things in their places began with creation, as told in the priestly version, which is Genesis chapter 1. On the second and the third days of creation, the three elements of sky, earth, and sea, they're delimited through a process of separation. So priestly version is what goes in that blank. So that basically what's happening is that God is putting everything in its place. This is and so this is part of following that they model themselves after. Ray says, turned around, twisted, and distorted. Yes. Then God fashioned living creatures for each environment. And each environment's creatures received standard habits and means of locomotion, which defined them. So sky was for non-carnivorous winged creatures. The sky was for non-meat-eating winged creatures. The earth is for four-legged creatures that chewed their cud and had cloven hooves. Cud is what that should say. Chewed their cud. Excuse me. And then the sea is for creatures with scales and fins. The sea is for creatures with scales and fins. So what's happening in Genesis 1 is that everything is being put in its place. The sky, the earth, and the sea. Now the place where Yahweh lived was called the holiest place. The place where Yahweh lived was called the holiest place. The tabernacle was the portable temple of the Israelites. The tabernacle was the portable temple of the Israelites. We don't get a temple until the days of Solomon. We don't get a temple until the days of Solomon. So up until the days of Solomon, we essentially have the tabernacle. David wanted to build the temple, and we'll get to that. He doesn't get the way it's explained in scriptures, that he doesn't get God's permission for that. But it's given to his son Solomon. But the place where God lives is called the holiest place. Now, the direction of holiness moved from outside the camp to the Holy of Holies. And for each zone, the priestly code defined who is allowed to be there, ending up with only the high priest in the Holy of Holies. So outside the camp is what goes in that blank in the middle of page 37. So in the biblical view, the area or the land of outside the Israelite camp is common. It's profane land. It's just common. There's nothing holy about it. The Israelite camp bears a certain degree of holiness. Then as you move in, the outer courtyard, the outer enclosure of the sanctuary bears a slightly higher degree of holiness. And it's accessible to Israelites who are pure. The sanctuary proper, which is in closer proximity to God, bears still a higher degree of holiness. It's accessible only to the priests, who are said to be holy ones within Israel. And then the inner shrine is the holiest area. It's accessible only to the holiest member of the nation, the high priest. So you get what's happening? We move from the outside the Israelite camp, and as we get closer and closer and closer, and so if you can imagine the tabernacle being almost at the center of the community, and as you move inward, right, and get closer to the tabernacle, and then to inside the sanctuary of the tabernacle, and then inside the inner shrine of the tabernacle, that the closer you get, the holier you need to be. But again, don't let your modern day mind run to holy the way that we talk about it. Holy is about being ritually pure and morally pure. It is also about being set aside for the service of God. It is about being pure, meaning that there's nothing that has rendered you ritually impure or morally impure. And so now you're the state that you're in, because you are pure, right? Because you haven't engaged in sex, or if you had, you've done the cleansing ritual to get past that. If you have handled any dead bodies or anything like that, if you helped with like a burial or something like that, that you've gone through the steps to become ritually pure. You haven't committed any sins that would make you morally impure, like murder, idolatry, or rampant sexual transgressions. So you haven't done those things. Now you're pure. Now you are in a state in which you can be sanctified to God. And so the closer you get to the inner shrine, the holier you have to be. The more you have to abstain from touching something that's potentially dead. Interestingly enough, this was one of the things that Jesus challenged. This was part of what's happening in the Good Samaritan. So I know we look down on the priest and the rabbi or whoever was passing by, but it may be, Alita says, is that where Catholics get no sex? I don't know. I'd have to research that. I'm not sure, perhaps. But it's certainly not something that Jews practice. So it wouldn't be something that Jesus would have condoned. But the Samaritan, I know we look down on the Levite and the priest that walked past the man that was on the side of the road. But part of what was happening was that you could become ritually impure by getting involved with helping him. And Jesus is saying, this don't make no sense, guys. We're so busy trying to be pure, we're not helping the people who need help. But I want you to get a context for the argument that touching this man was left for dead, basically. And so touching him would have made them ritually impure, which would have meant having to go through whatever procedure you had to go through. I mean, they make it so that you don't want to get ritually impure, right? So go through whatever procedure that you had to go through in order to basically be clean again and be put back in service to God. So again, just to put that in context. So the symbolism of the tabernacle expresses two important themes of priestly theology: the continuity of life and the presence of God. The tabernacle, there's two themes that's going on with the priestly theology. One is the continuity of life and the presence of God. I've got a comment. Okay. The priestly code defined the social and ritual roles of all people within Israel. Membership in social groups was based on family lineage, and roles were assigned accordingly. Where you belong was based on who you were born to, and then you received a role according to who you were born to. Only the direct descendants of Aaron could function as priests or become the high priest. Only the direct descendants, this is the bottom of 37, only the direct descendants of Aaron could function as high priests, could function as priests or become the high priest. Priests were the only ones allowed to offer sacrifices and to enter the sanctuary. The high priest could consult with God directly in the cloud, and by means of divination dice called Urim and Thummim. Urim and Thummim. This is kind of like a casting of lots in order to understand, like, what does God want me to do? And you've got the divine dice, and you throw them, and how they land tells you something. It would be like our, modern day tarot cards, or modern day, palm readers and stuff like that, psychics. And I don't mean that they were looked down on, because only the high priest could do this. So it wasn't something that was looked down on, but only the high priest could consult with God directly in the cloud, meaning going into the holiest of holies, and by means of the divination dice called Urim and Thummim. So now the primary religious rituals of Israelite religion, they involve sacrifice and offerings. There were 5 main types of sacrifice. Number 1, whole burnt offering. I'm in the middle of 38, so that you know where you're filling out. And what's underlined is what goes in the blanks. Whole burnt offering. Whole burnt offering. Purification offering. Remember, purify, you're trying to get back to being pure. Reparation. You want to repair the relationship with God. Reparation offering. A grain offering. And a peace offering. Whole burnt offering. Purification offering. Reparation offering. Grain offering. And a peace offering. These were the 5 main types of sacrifice that you would see in this Israelite community. We don't 100% know what all of these sacrifices were about, but what we can tell is that the overall significance of sacrificial rituals may have been that various types of impurities and deliberate sins disturbed God's, I really should say land. Reverend Mary said overall significance, but that actually should say land. Yeah, it says God's overall significance. It really should say land. That's interesting. Anyway, the answer she put in the answer key was the overall significance. But what would happen is that you would commit a sin, and the sin would basically defile God's land. So you had to have the habits that supported what God was giving you. You had to have the habits of the promised land. And so you could have a type of impurity, like moral impurity, that literally it defiled the land. And it was like a blood guilt. And it was only removable by death of the perpetrator. And it would be such that like the land would vomit you out. Again, this is the type of thing that you see like with Sodom and Gomorrah, and there are other examples like that in the Bible, but where you were defiling what God created. So your purity was about being in relationship with the earth. Which was your domain as a human being to manage. And so you had to keep yourself in a state of being able to take care of what God had given you to oversee. Holy times, just as space, could be sacred or profane. So you could have, and again, profane meaning common. So the year was defined, defined the basic cycle of larger events and organized the cultic calendar. So there are similar concentric circles of holiness in regards to time. So again, anything can be profane, meaning that it has not been set aside or has not been made pure so that it can be set aside for God's use, right? Or that's not what I want to say. Because things can be profane and they can be pure and impure. They can be holy and they can only be pure to be holy. So days can be common or profane. So a work day is a profane day. There are ordinary, common, profane work days. And then there are certain holy days like the New Year or the Passover. These are special days that have been set aside to recognize God. They are separated, they're demarcated from common time by special rules that mark them as different. In our world, that would be things like Christmas, Thanksgiving, and other days, Easter, days that have been set aside. They are holy days where we are using them to recognize God, to give thanks for what God has given us, that they have been set aside. So these are, which is interesting where our word holiday comes from. It's a holy day. So holier than these days is the Sabbath, which happens every 7 days. And these are demarcated by even further rules and observances. And the holiest day is Yom Kippur. It is almost like the Sabbath of Sabbaths. It is the Day of Atonement. It is a day where everybody come together to get pure and be set aside for God's service. And so this day is separated from all of the days by additional rules and observances in keeping with its profound holiness. The holiness of persons, of objects, of time, of space, all converge on Yom Kippur, because it's only on this most holy day that the most holy person, the high priest, enters the most holy of holies, the innermost shrine in the tabernacle. And the high priest performs a ritual upon the most holy of objects, which is the mercy seat and the ark itself, once a year. So it's the one time that the high priest goes into the Holy of Holies. The high priest doesn't even go into the Holy of Holies any other time other than Yom Kippur. So it's the Sabbath of Sabbaths. So it's a big deal. But again, holiness is not purity. These are two different things. Purity makes you available to be holy. But you could be pure and common, or you could be pure and profane. Again, not using the word profane the way that we have been taught to use it in modern times. The Sabbath, the seventh day of the week, was a day set apart from the others. Special rules governed activity on that day. Now, the book of Numbers, and we're going to go through this quickly because we're at the end. The book of Numbers divides into 3 sections on the basis of content and geographical setting. It's 3 sections. It's separated according to content and geographical setting. The first section is just a continuation from the book of Leviticus of the priestly code. The second and the third sections, they resume from the book of Exodus, the narrative of Israel's experience into the wilderness. So Exodus is about the experience in the wilderness, And then Leviticus is like, stops and says, okay, wait, let's deal with all the habits that you got to have to inhabit the promised land, right? So it deals with all the ways that you're supposed to govern yourself. Numbers kind of picks up where Leviticus leaves off and gives you a little bit more about the priestly code. And then the last part of it is the rest of the story about getting into the promised land. So letter A, the priestly code defined a social hierarchy within Israel. So first you had the family of Aaron. This is a social, so the highest is the family of Aaron. Second is the families of the tribe of Levi. Third is Judah, which was in a place of preeminence. Judah being the tribe of Judah and the location Judah as well. It was in a place of preeminence. The lowest were resident aliens, so people who were not Hebrews but who were part of the community, maybe folks they had picked up along the way in their wilderness journey. So they were resident aliens. This would be undocumented citizens in our world. And then the furthest, as far as a social hierarchy, were foreign nations. So Aaron goes in that first blank, Levi goes in the second blank, Judah in the third blank, and the last blank is for foreign. So this priestly code, it set up this hierarchy of who is most important. Family of Aaron, families of the tribe of Levi, Judah, resident aliens, foreign nations. About a year after they arrived in the Sinai wilderness, the cloud of God's presence lifted and signaled that Israel must move on to the promised land. The cloud lifted, and it was the sign from God that it's time to go into the promised land. And so the Numbers account of that wilderness experience, what it does is it highlights the dissatisfaction of the people. And so here's where you get complaints about food, complaints about Moses' leadership, and the negative reports of the spies. Complaints about food, complaints about Moses' leadership, and the negative reports of the spies. We're going to stop there, and when we come back next Thursday, we're going to pick up with Deuteronomy. We're going to pick up with Deuteronomy when we come back next Thursday. Deuteronomy starts on page 41. Any questions? Any takeaways? Any aha moments? Anything you heard that can help you do life differently, do life better? Things that help make things clearer. Joe said it's coming together. Tell me what you mean when you say it's coming together. Ray says there's a lot to digest. Tell me what you mean. Tell me what you guys mean by that. It's coming together. Joe says things I thought I knew. There's a lot of stuff that we have been handed, that we have been told is biblical. And, you know, because we were handed it and forbidden to ask questions about it, you know, we got it at an age where we took it lock, stock, and barrel and just, you know, never questioned. Ray says, a very interesting look at these books from a different perspective than I've been taught. Oh, yay. Hey, Reverend Shirley. Okay. Yes. Reverend Shirley Lawson. Love me some Reverend Shirley Lawson. And Alita says, well, you have to change what you thought you knew. That's really it. It really is. It's about a mature spirituality. A mature spirituality. And really just opening your heart to know that this book didn't just survive for no reason. Yes, Yvonne says, I'm enjoying the teaching. I now honor the Sabbath, my new normal. Yes. Awesome. Wonderful. Well, thank you guys for tonight. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Please read ahead on Deuteronomy. If you are doing this class for continuing education units, the only person that I'm aware of for certain, because they have given me the assignments, is Constance. The next assignment that is due is assignment number 4 on the tabernacle. Assignment number 4 on the tabernacle. Assignment number 4 on the tabernacle. We have finished the book of Exodus, and so this will allow you to go through and look at the tabernacle. And again, this diagram, as you can see, that you're entering the court. And so as you get closer and closer and closer, these are the different areas that we just talked about with the purity, that as you get closer and closer and closer, that you have to be holier and holier, meaning a greater level of being set aside for God. So in a modern day context, it would be, prayer chaplains, teachers, ministers, then senior minister. Again, you're just moving inwardly on the inward circle. And then in the holiest of holies, that only goes into one time of the year with Yom Kippur, where it's the Day of Atonement. Everybody comes, and everybody is basically as a community is being purified and atoning their relationship with God, being put in a state where they can be of use for the sacred, that they can come into contact with the sacred. Thank you. Constance says burning bowl. Yes, very much so. Very much like our burning bowl ceremony. Awesome. Thank you so much. If there are no other questions, and I bless you this evening. I thank you for just being a part of tonight, and I hope that this was a blessing for you and that this deepens your spiritual walk. Have a good night.